I thought that trip would be just another escape from my routine. But one stranger changed everything, and my journey turned into the most unexpected adventure of my life. Hi, my name is Emily, and this is my story. I had decided to travel through Europe on my own. My friends couldn't join me, and I felt this restless urge to get away from the city, from endless calls, from work meetings that seemed to stretch forever. The ticket to Italy was a spontaneous purchase, almost reckless, but it felt like freedom. No plans, no schedules, just me, a suitcase, and the road ahead. Florence greeted me with warm sunlight, the smell of fresh bread from the little bakeries, and a crowd of tourists buzzing around the train station. I was supposed to head south, to Naples, but fate intervened. A sudden strike had canceled all trains. The platform became chaos, people shouting, refund lines forming, confusion spreading like wildfire. And there I was, standing with my suitcase, not knowing what to do next. That's when I saw him. A tall guy with a backpack slung over one shoulder, worn jeans, and a confident smile that seemed completely out of place in all the commotion. He caught my eye, winked, and walked over as if we had already known each other. "Looks like we're stuck here together," he said in English, his voice calm, almost playful. That's how I met Daniel. Daniel introduced himself with the ease of someone who is used to turning strangers into companions. He had that kind of presence, magnetic but unforced. When he smiled, the noise and confusion of the station seemed to fade into the background. We stood together for a while, watching the crowd grow more impatient. People argued with officials, others dragged their bags away angrily, but Daniel just leaned casually against a pillar, his backpack resting at his feet. "So, what's your plan now?" he asked, tilting his head toward me. I hesitated. The truth was, I didn't have one. That had been the whole point of this trip. No rigid schedules, no obligations. And yet, standing in that moment, my freedom suddenly felt like emptiness. "I don't know," I admitted. I was supposed to catch a train south. But now, Daniel's grin widened, as if he had been waiting for me to say exactly that. "Perfect," he said. "Then maybe you'll be crazy enough to try something different." He pulled out his phone and showed me a rental car app. Why waste a day waiting here when we could just drive? Tuscany is right there. Vineyards, small towns, coastlines. Trust me, it's better than sitting around. It sounded insane. I barely knew him. Every rational voice in my head whispered that this was not safe, that this was reckless. But another voice, the one I had been trying to listen to ever since I booked this trip, said this was exactly the kind of risk I needed. I studied him for a moment. He didn't seem dangerous. He seemed alive, and maybe that was what scared me most. "How long were you planning on waiting before I said yes?" I asked with a half smile. 5 seconds, he replied, eyes glinting with mischief. I laughed, shook my head, and before I could stop myself, I said the words that would change everything. "All right, let's do it." Within an hour, we were in a tiny rental car with windows down, music blasting from his phone. The city faded behind us as winding roads carried us deeper into the countryside. Tuscany stretched out before us like something from a painting. Rolling hills, endless vineyards, the sun melting into gold over every field. We didn't talk about where we were going. It didn't matter. The road itself felt like the destination. And somewhere between the laughter, the music, and the taste of adventure in the air, I realized something. I hadn't felt this free in years. The car wound its way along narrow roads that seemed to appear out of nowhere, twisting through vineyards and olive groves. Every turn revealed another postcard view. Fields dotted with sunflowers, stone farmhouses clinging to hillsides, cypress trees standing like sentinels against the horizon. Daniel drove with one hand lazily resting on the wheel, the other tapping along to the rhythm of the music blasting from his phone. It was some old rock playlist, songs I hadn't heard in years, yet somehow every track felt like the perfect soundtrack to that drive. He sang loudly, off-key, and when he caught me smiling, he nudged me to join in. Soon, we were both shouting lyrics into the wind like two kids on summer break. We stopped in a small village tucked into the hills. The streets were quiet, almost deserted, with laundry swaying on balconies and the smell of fresh bread drifting from bakery. Daniel insisted we try the local wine, even though it was barely noon. We ended up sitting on a stone wall, sipping from mismatched glasses the shopkeeper had lent us, watching the life of the town unfold. Children chasing a ball, an old man watering flowers, a woman calling out from a balcony. This, Daniel said, gesturing to everything around us, is why I left London. Deadlines, offices, endless commutes. I felt like I was suffocating. Out here, every day feels like it could go anywhere. Don't you think that's better? His words struck me harder than I expected. I thought of my own life back home. Meetings that drained me, my phone buzzing with demands, nights spent scrolling instead of living. Was I any different than he had been? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked at him. The sun caught in his hair, his eyes bright with the thrill of the road, of possibility. And I wondered if maybe this stranger wasn't just someone I'd stumbled upon by chance. Maybe he was exactly the kind of disruption I had been craving without even realizing it. When he noticed me staring, he smirked. "Careful. You look like you're already plotting to run away with me." I laughed, but the truth was the thought didn't seem so impossible anymore. By the time the sun dipped low and the sky turned shades of rose and violet, we were back on the road. The car's headlights cut through the darkening countryside, and for the first time in years, I wasn't worried about where tomorrow would take me. With Daniel beside me, it felt like the whole world had cracked open, waiting for us to step inside. On the third day of our unplanned road trip, I caught myself studying him more closely than I should have. There was something about Daniel that felt both untamed and grounded at the same time, as if he had learned to live in motion, never clinging too tightly to anything. We had been driving along a winding coastal road when the sea suddenly opened up before us, stretching endlessly into the horizon. Daniel pulled over without hesitation, and we climbed out of the car to breathe in the salt air. The waves crashed violently against the rocks below, sending mist into the air, the sound loud enough to drown out our thoughts. We sat on the hood of the car, sharing a small packet of crackers and a bottle of cheap wine we had picked up at a roadside shop. He told me about London, the endless gray skies, the cubicle walls, the feeling of being trapped inside someone else's idea of a life. One morning, he said, swirling the bottle in his hand, I woke up and couldn't do it anymore. I quit on the spot, stuffed some clothes in a bag, and booked the cheapest flight out of Heathrow. I didn't even tell anyone where I was going. There was no bitterness in his voice, just relief, as if escaping had been the only option. His eyes flicked to mine. Freedom is the only thing worth risking everything for. Don't you think so? The question lingered in the air between us. I felt the wind tug at my hair, the taste of salt on my lips, and I knew he wasn't really asking about himself. He was asking about me, about whether I, too, was willing to let go. I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out, because deep down I wasn't sure. I had spent so long clinging to stability, to plans, to the safety of knowing what tomorrow would bring. And yet, wasn't that why I had come here in the first place? To break free? He didn't press me. Instead, he leaned back against the windshield, gazing at the sky as it shifted from blue to a deep amber. For a long while, we sat in silence, the crash of the waves filling the gaps where words should have been. And then, without warning, he turned to me and grinned. "Come on, let's see where the road takes us next." He slid off the hood, offered me his hand, and in that simple gesture, I felt the pull of something far greater than just a journey. It was the pull of possibility, of surrendering to the unknown. I took his hand, and in that moment, I knew I was already falling. We reached a small seaside town just as the last traces of daylight were fading. The streets were narrow and quiet, lined with shuttered shops and balconies strung with drying clothes. Our phones had lost their signal miles ago, and without GPS, we had no idea where the hotel was supposed to be. "Guess we're officially lost," Daniel said, though the grin on his face made it sound like a victory rather than a problem. We wandered through cobblestoned alleys, dragging our bags behind us, trying to follow faded signs that led nowhere. The town felt like it was holding its breath. No tourists, only the sound of the sea echoing faintly in the distance. At one point, I laughed so hard at the absurdity of our wandering that I had to stop and lean against a wall just to catch my breath. Eventually, the twisting streets spat us out onto a cliffside path. And there it was, a weathered lighthouse standing guard over the restless ocean. Its light blinked rhythmically, cutting through the dark as waves pounded the rocks below. The air smelled of salt and something wild, untamed. We stood there for a while, saying nothing. Daniel's face was lit in fragments, first by the glow of the lighthouse beam, then by the silver wash of the moon. The wind whipped around us, cold enough to make me shiver, though part of me wondered if it wasn't just the closeness of him that unsettled me more. I don't know what pushed me over the edge in that moment. Maybe the wine we had shared earlier, maybe the way he looked at me, as if he had been waiting for me all along, or maybe it was simply that raw feeling of freedom I had been chasing since the trip began. Before I could stop myself, I leaned in and kissed him. For half a heartbeat, I feared I'd made a mistake, but then he kissed me back with such intensity it was as though he had been holding it in since the very first moment at the station. His hand slid to the back of my neck, pulling me closer, the sound of the waves crashing like applause around us. When we finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against mine. "I was hoping you'd do that," he whispered. We stayed by the lighthouse long after, talking in fragments, laughing at nothing, sometimes just sitting in silence, letting the sea fill the spaces between us. And as the night deepened, a quiet truth settled inside me. Somewhere between Florence and here, between laughter and detours, I had crossed a line. This wasn't just a road trip anymore. The morning after the lighthouse felt different, though nothing had been spoken aloud. Daniel and I packed up our things and hit the road again, but there was a shift subtle yet undeniable. The music was still loud, the laughter still effortless, but now there were glances that lingered too long, touches that didn't need excuses. Our route took us north, winding away from the coast and toward Venice. Neither of us had a plan, and that was the beauty of it. Sometimes we'd stop in a nameless village just because the smell of fresh pastries drifted from a bakery. Sometimes we'd pull over on a hilltop, only to sit and watch the sky ripple with clouds. By the time we reached Venice, the world felt like a dream. The canals glittered in the afternoon light, gondolas rocking gently as though humming to themselves. We wandered for hours, deliberately losing ourselves in the labyrinth of narrow streets. Daniel bought us gelato from a vendor who swore his family had made it the same way for 100 years. The taste was so rich and cold that I laughed at how quickly it melted down my hand, and Daniel leaned over to lick a drip from my wrist without even asking. The gesture made my stomach twist with heat. At night, we sat on the steps of a quiet piazza, a bottle of cheap Prosecco between us, listening to the distant notes of a violin floating from some unseen window. Daniel told me about the places he wanted to see: Morocco, Patagonia, maybe even the Arctic. No maps, no deadlines, he said. Just movement. He turned to me then, and I knew the question was coming before he spoke it. "And you? If you could go anywhere, where would you run to?" I wanted to say something bold, something that matched his daring, but the truth slipped out before I could dress it up. "Anywhere, as long as I don't have to go alone." His expression softened, as though my words had given shape to something he had already been hoping to hear. The next day, we drove north again, this time toward Lake Garda. The lake shimmered like a sheet of glass, framed by mountains that looked painted into the horizon. We rented a small boat, our laughter echoing over the water as we let the current carry us. Daniel lay back on the wooden seat, his face turned toward the sun, and I caught myself thinking that I could live inside that moment forever. It was intoxicating. The spontaneity, the freedom, the closeness. And yet, somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew it couldn't last forever. Trips ended. Real life always waited. But as Daniel reached for my hand, fingers threading easily with mine, I shoved that thought aside. For now, there was only us, and the open road still waiting. Rome was where the dream began to fray. We arrived after days of winding through back roads and detours, our car coated in dust, our clothes carrying the smell of the sea and the sun. Rome should have been overwhelming in the best way. Its streets alive with history, its piazzas glowing under golden light. And at first we wandered through ruins, tossed coins into the Trevi fountain, ate slices of pizza so perfect they felt like a sin. Daniel teased me for photographing every single gelato I tried. I teased him back for pretending he didn't care, only to sneak bites of mine. But beneath the laughter, a tension began to take root. I had booked a return ticket weeks ago, back when this trip was meant to be nothing more than a temporary escape. The departure date crept closer, and with each passing hour, I felt it pressing against me, an invisible weight. Daniel didn't mention it, but I knew he hadn't bought any ticket home. For him, there was no deadline, no end. For me, there was. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the Colosseum, casting its arches in shadow, he stopped mid-step and looked at me with that piercing steadiness I was starting to recognize. "You don't want this to end, do you?" he asked softly. The question made my throat tighten. I wanted to say no, I didn't want it to end. But the truth was more complicated. I had responsibilities waiting at home, a job, friends, a life that I had built, even if it often felt like a cage. Could I really just walk away from it all? I didn't answer, and Daniel didn't push. Instead, he reached for my hand and held it as we walked, his thumb brushing over my knuckles like he was trying to memorize the feel of me. That silence said more than words ever could. Later that night, we found ourselves at the train station, not because we needed to be there, but because Daniel wanted to see where the journeys begin. The vast hall buzzed with people coming and going, announcements echoing overhead. My chest tightened as I stared at the departures board. My train listed there in bright letters, its time creeping closer with every minute. Daniel noticed. His eyes darkened, but he didn't speak. He just slipped his arm around me, pulling me closer as though he could hold me against the inevitability of time. That night, in our small rented room, sleep wouldn't come. I lay awake listening to his breathing beside me, torn between two lives. The one I had known, safe but suffocating, and the one that had only just begun, unpredictable but alive. And I realized with a chill that in less than 24 hours, I would have to choose. The morning of my departure arrived too soon, pressing down on me with a heaviness I couldn't shake. Rome, usually buzzing with warmth and color, felt muted that day, as if the city itself knew what was coming. Daniel was quiet over breakfast. He pushed his coffee cup back and forth across the table, his usual spark dimmed. I tried to fill the silence with small talk about the streets we hadn't seen yet, the ruins we could visit if only we had more time. But every word tasted hollow. Both of us knew the clock was ticking. At the station, the air was thick with movement. Announcements echoing, suitcases rolling, people rushing past with eyes fixed on destinations. I clutched my ticket in my hand, the thin slip of paper that separated me from the life I had stumbled into here. We stood side by side, watching the departures board flicker. My train appeared at the top, the letters sharp and unyielding. Daniel turned to me then, his face unreadable for a moment. But when he spoke, his voice was low, steady, almost too calm. "Come with me." I blinked, startled. "What?" He stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the heat of him even in the chill of the station. His eyes held mine, unflinching. No plans, no maps, no tickets home, just us, wherever the road goes. The world seemed to narrow around me. The chatter of the crowd, the hiss of the trains, the announcements over the speakers, all of it blurred into static. All I could hear was his voice. All I could see was the question in his eyes. My fingers tightened around the ticket. That ticket was safety, order, everything I'd always known. Daniel was the opposite, chaos, risk, and a freedom I had only tasted these past few days. The board flashed again. My train, now boarding. "Emily," he whispered, and in his tone was both a plea and a promise. I turned toward the platform. My chest burned with the weight of the choice. My feet wanted to move, to follow the path I had prepared. But my heart was already on another road entirely. For the first time in my life, I didn't know which step would be the right one. And in that moment of paralysis, I realized something. Maybe right and wrong weren't the point anymore. Maybe the point was simply to choose. The platform was alive with urgency. The metallic screech of brakes, the hiss of doors opening, the swell of passengers pressing forward. My train stood there, sleek and certain, a reminder of the life that waited for me on the other side of the journey. I felt Daniel's hand brush against mine. Not quite holding, not quite letting go. That single touch held more weight than any embrace ever could. "Emily," he said again, his voice steady but his eyes betraying the storm inside. "If you walk onto that train, I'll let you go. But if you don't," he stopped, as though finishing the sentence would be too much. I looked at the ticket still clutched in my hand. My name printed neatly. The date, the time, the seat number. All so official, so decided. It was proof of a plan I had made before I knew him, before I knew what it felt like to laugh until my ribs ached, to kiss someone with the sea crashing behind us, to feel alive in ways I hadn't even realized I'd been missing. The announcer's voice echoed. "Last call." The words cut through me like a blade. I turned toward the train. The doors yawned open, people disappearing inside one by one. For a moment, I picture myself finding my seat, watching the Italian countryside blur past the window, rehearsing answers to work emails in my head. Safe, predictable, empty. Then I turned back to Daniel. His expression was raw, stripped of the easy confidence he always carried. In that instant, he wasn't the untamed traveler anymore. He was simply a man asking me to take a chance on him. My heart slammed against my ribs. I took one step toward the train, then another. The ticket shook in my hand, damp with sweat. The guard blew his whistle. And then I stopped. The noise of the station fell away. I heard only my breath, my heartbeat, and the softest trace of Daniel whispering my name. I tore the ticket neatly in half. The pieces fluttered from my hand like tiny white birds, scattering to the floor as the train doors slid shut without me inside. Daniel's eyes widened, then softened, as though he hadn't let himself believe I would actually do it. Slowly, deliberately, I walked back to him. "I'm not going home," I said, my voice shaking but certain. And before he could speak, I leaned in and kissed him, not with hesitation, but with the certainty of someone who had finally chosen. The train pulled out of the station without me. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what came next. The train was gone, but I didn't feel its absence. Instead, I felt the weight lifting from my chest, replaced with something terrifying and exhilarating. Possibility. Daniel's arms wrapped around me, firm and grounding, yet the moment felt anything but anchored. We stood in the middle of the bustling station, as if we were the only two people in the world. His breath was warm against my hair as he whispered, "You don't know how much I hoped you'd stay." I laughed, shaky but real. "Neither do I." We left the station without a plan, our bags rolling behind us like reluctant reminders of the life I just walked away from. Outside, Rome opened wide, bathed in late afternoon sun. The streets were crowded, alive, unpredictable, exactly like the road ahead of us. That night, we didn't book a hotel. Instead, we drove until the city lights fell away and the sky stretched black and infinite above us. We parked on a hillside overlooking the countryside and lay on the hood of the car, staring at constellations I didn't know the names of. Daniel pointed to one cluster and told me it was Orion, though I suspected he was making it up. I didn't care. "I don't know what tomorrow looks like," I admitted. The words trembled in the quiet. "Good," he replied, his hand finding mine. "Then it's ours to make." I turned my head to look at him. His eyes reflected the stars, but it wasn't the night sky that made me feel infinite. It was him. We fell asleep like that, the hum of crickets around us, the universe stretching endlessly above. And when I woke to the first light of dawn, I realized something. This wasn't just a trip anymore. It wasn't even just an adventure. It was the beginning of a life where every day was unwritten, where freedom wasn't just an idea, but the air we breathed together. And as the sun rose over Tuscany, painting the hills in gold, I knew one truth with absolute certainty. I had chosen the right road. With him. Always with him.